Zstar was started by four of us we all worked for the same company. We worked for Anglo-American De Beers, and we got to a point where we decided it would be better for us to be working on our own independently. We also, I think, got a little bit tired of the sort of corporate environment. We wanted to be able to make our own decisions and also have fun at the same time. So we were also at an age where it was suitable to start the company. We were all getting a little bit grey, or I was speaking for myself, I suppose, but we wanted that independence, and that was about 10 years ago. And when we started, we weren't 100% sure how it would work out, but it's worked out very well for us. We're all geologists, and we all have specialist skills and experience in geostatistics, mineral resource estimation. That's essentially what we do. So the company focuses on specific, quite specialized areas of mineral resource evaluation.
Absolutely, and you've got some blue chip clients. How have you developed those relationships over the years?
We started primarily with De Beers as a major client because our experience is predominantly in diamonds. And in fact, that was where we've spent probably the bulk of our careers, evaluating diamond deposits. We've worked on many of the major diamond deposits in the world. And so we started off with De Beers as a fairly major client. But it's really word of mouth gets around, and soon we got approached by others. A number of small companies have worked with us over the years as well. We still do a lot of work for De Beers. I think we're living in a time now where things have changed a little bit. When we were at De Beers and Anglo, there was a strong mentoring, which we don't see these days, and it's good for Zstar because it does mean that we still have skills, we still have experience that matters, that counts. But yeah, so we've carried on working for De Beers, and then we've developed a clientele which is fairly solid over the years. We don't do much marketing, as I said. It's mainly been by word of mouth, so it's been very good for us. I think that also probably shows that we're providing a reasonable service. We don't have, or we've had very few unhappy clients, you know. And I think the diamond experience, the diamonds are really quite difficult to estimate. And because of that, we're sort of on the one end of the spectrum. We found it reasonably easy to get involved in other commodities. We all also have gold experience. We all started on the Wits gold, or spent time on the mines or doing exploration. So we did quite a bit of gold work when we started out, and then we also went into base metals. And that's been sort of an ongoing situation for a while. We do a lot of work in base metals and gold, and we've expanded into things like uranium. We've done odd things like cement, phosphates, and we do quite a bit of iron ore work at the moment for Kumba. So we have still quite a few, getting back to your original question, quite a few major clients, big corporates, mining houses. At the moment, I would imagine we still have probably 60-70% of our work is still diamonds, but that tends to fluctuate. In a consulting environment, it's up and down. Sometimes you're busy with certain projects. So we've had years where we've done a lot of work in base metals for companies like Vedanta, which is dominated over a period of a few months, you know. But as I said, yeah, diamonds is still the main focus.
And how's technology? Obviously, you've seen since the beginning of your career to now a lot of changes on the way how you approach your business.
Yes, indeed. I think when we started, we were using sort of standard tools and things, but a lot of the geostatistical applications require fair amount of computing power, and that's changed over the years, and that's facilitated the process. If we run simulations, I remember many years ago running my first simulation and ran on a Toshiba laptop for about 13 days, I think. These days that simulation will run in 30 minutes or less. So yes, things have changed significantly. We've also expanded a little bit into software development, very specialized software development. It's not one of our key focus areas, but we've got involved because we understand linear programming, and we've used a little bit of AI and things like that to develop specific code for mainly De Beers. So that's, the technology has helped there as well. But what we do is really, you can be done on a laptop, on any computer with a little bit of power. We don't really need sophisticated equipment, so to speak. Not in this day and age, anyway.
And the fourth industrial revolution, do you see that that seems to be the buzzword at the moment?
Well, yeah, I think it is. It's not very clear how it's going to impact us at the moment, or in the short term. It will, I think it will have an impact, but it's difficult to tell at this stage exactly what's going to happen or how it will impact us. Things will change, no question. Things are changing, and you have to adapt a little bit. But in essence, we're sort of continuing to fill that gap between exploration and mining. That's what we do. We try and understand what's in the ground, quantify it, and that process is unlikely to change in the long term.
And communication must be essential in your line of work. How do you get the right message across to your clients?
Yeah, I think communication is very important because, you know, we work, for instance, with geological models, and some of these models are produced by really good, competent geologists, but they don't understand the estimation component. So they develop these models without really understanding how the models are going to be used down the line for estimation. So there's an element of communication required to try and make them understand that, for instance, domaining is important, because you can't practice or utilize geostatistics unless you're working in the same geological environment. So it's very important to define zones or domains. And so there's an element of communication needed to explain this to our clients. So very often when we start a project, we'll tend to want to sit around the table and see what's been done historically and talk to the geologists, and then also explain what we need from our side. And it also includes things like, for instance, data. People do not look after their data, despite the fact that I think there'll be general agreement that it's very important. But we find quite often that, not quite often, I would say sort of 80% of our projects, the minute we start looking at the data closely, there are problems that need to be looked at more carefully. And they're not always errors, they're not always mistakes in data entry or things like that. It's purely that the data hasn't been analyzed correctly. So there's an element of communication required there to talk to clients and explain to them that when you have really strange outliers, for instance, they need to be capped or they need to be trimmed, and you need to take cognizance of these sort of things. You know, coming from a world of diamonds where a zero value is very important. It's very different to, say, for argument's sake, gold or base metals, where you don't really deal with zero values or barren samples. You deal with low values. So the threshold values, how these are determined, become important. How the assays work, and so on. That's very important. So yeah, there's a lot of communication. Also, I think geologists tend not to be mathematical, and consequently, they tend to sort of box estimation and stay clear of it. Whereas it's very important that they have a basic understanding of the process. So there's a lot of communication needed there, just to explain how variograms work, how spatial analysis works, and what kriging is about, because it's not that complex. It's actually fairly straightforward. But there tends to be, I mean, we give courses at the universities to postgraduate students, and you can already see at university level, the guys don't like the mathematics. They get into geology for reasons that are, for whatever reason, but they're different. They don't, so they're not that that many incline towards geostatistics, so shall we say.
And consulting in countries of different languages and cultures, are there some challenges there as well?
There have been. We started out primarily in Southern Africa and working in Canada and places like that, so English was fairly straightforward, dominant language. We've subsequently moved into countries where the language has become a bit of an issue, like Angola, for instance. And a lot of the work we've done in Angola involves training, and we have a Russian component. So we have, the last time I was in Angola, we ran a course. We had a Russian translator, and he was explaining the difficulties of translating from my English to his Russian, and then to Portuguese for the participants of the course. And it was surprising to me how tiring it was for him to just continually translate on an ongoing basis for 5 days on end. It really, it was quite tiring. And you lose a little bit in the translation. So one has to be very careful about that aspect. But it's not a major problem. Google Translate comes in really useful in these countries where English is not the dominant language.
And doing business in Russia, that must be quite an interesting experience, so to speak.
Yeah, the Russian culture is a little bit different. They've been dominant players in the diamond industry for many years. And they do things differently. They have a different culture. If, for example, if I go back to looking at the way some of their mines operate, they tend to refer some of the specialized skills to central facilities, central organizations, whereas a lot happens on site in the Western world. You do estimation on site, for instance. If you're talking about diamonds, for example, when you're looking at size frequency, assortment, revenue estimates and models, very often that's done sort of centrally as opposed to our normal experience on other mines where it's done on site, for example. There are bigger companies like De Beers who also tend to do these things centrally. But yeah, there are differences in the way historically things have been done.
Mining Charter 3 been in the news a lot. Your thoughts on those developments?
It's something we're quite removed from, you know, and we tend to keep our head down. Obviously we all have different views on the matter, and I'm pleased that it's being addressed and being discussed and coming out in the open. I think we've got a way to go yet. I think there are a lot of people that are unhappy, and you can see the way the industry's gone in South Africa. I think investors are not stupid. They've long ago sort of stood on the sideline and not jumped in until they've got certainty, until they've got clarity. So I hope that things turn around in the near future. It takes a long time, but I do hope that they get it sorted so that we can move forward. Yeah.
Is it frustrating seeing the amount of potential in South Africa, but all these sort of roadblocks?
There's massive potential. There's massive. There always has been, not just South Africa, Southern Africa in general. And it's very sad to see that it's not being, especially in the current times where we can do with a bit of a boost in the economy. It's sad to see there's no exploration. You know, or it's not right to say there's no exploration, but there's very little exploration. There are very few greenfields projects coming online. And that's reflecting the sort of lack of interest by investors. They're just not willing to take the risks without some surety in the future, which is rather sad, I'm afraid. But let's see, maybe things will change.
And which developing markets have you seen picking up the slack?
Yeah, once again, it's a little bit out of our field. You know, we don't monitor too closely, look at the markets too closely. We tend to have clients coming in and focused on very specific commodities rather than people saying what's out there and looking at the options, looking at the general broader spectrum rather than, you know. So it's not something we monitor too closely, not really getting involved.
And in terms of commodities, what's hot in 2018?
Well, again, in our world of diamonds, it sort of carries on. There are a lot of new things happening because of the way technology. So there's a lot of focus on things like lithium. There's a lot of talk of graphite is picking up in Mozambique, in other parts of Southern Africa as well. The rare earths are always going to play a role because of the demand. And there's a bit of that happening in South Africa as well. Not enough, again, as I've said just now. There's a little bit happening in Namibia as well. So there's a few things happening. The more cell phones we use, the more we're going to need the raw materials that go into those phones. So those markets will always be strong.
And in terms of technology, you've got a big server room here. Obviously, you need a lot of cloud and on-site storage.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier on, the sort of greyness or lack of hair sometimes reflects our... we have a couple of younger people that are more astute when it comes to these things. Yes, but you do have to be aware of that sort of thing. Yeah, we use the cloud a lot. We use all sorts of... we have to back up our information all the time, and we are still using service providers to guide us in that regard. But yeah, you have to be quite astute with all the sort of upcoming technology.
And we see fibre being rolled out. Does that make what you do able to be done quicker?
Yes, we use fibre all the time, not just for our basic server access, but for all our telephones. For everything we do is on fibre. Yeah.
And doing business in rural or remote areas, what are some of the challenges to that?
Well, yes, it is sometimes quite challenging. I've been in very rural parts of the DRC where there's no infrastructure. I went, for example, to Chikapa, and in a place like that, where there are probably close to Chikapa 2 million people on the outskirts, I would imagine that expands up to about 4 million, and yet you don't have garages. You siphon your fuel out of a 200-litre tank on the back of the bucky, that sort of thing. There are very few roads. Interesting for me, the interesting thing there was that those 4 million people derive their income and their livelihood from diamonds, primarily. There's very little even subsistence farming, and when you look at the way, there's the complete lack of infrastructure, lack of electricity, power, water, that sort of thing. But when you look at the way people make a living, they make ends meet. So MTN is very strong there. Everybody's got cell phones, but they've got nothing to charge, so they've got to travel by bicycle 10 kilometers to somewhere where they can plug into a generator that's running to charge phones and things. So I think there's all sorts of challenges, but the industry in the DRC is very strong. It's a Garimpera type operation. There are very few people, bigger companies. They've tried, but there are very few bigger companies working there at the moment. It has its challenges.
And the conflict minerals challenge, is that still an issue?
Not for us, no. We tend to be working in a very small part of the business, and we don't get involved in those sort of things. I'm happy personally to see that there is still a bit of focus. What started in Kimberley many years ago is ongoing. There are some areas which probably need closer governance, but it seems to be working reasonably well.
And optimizing drilling, what are some of the latest advancements in that regard?
Well, it's quite interesting because I think a large part of our work now is optimizing drilling and sampling results programs, and that has come about, I think, largely because of our work in diamonds. When you work in diamonds, samples tend to be quite big. In the placer environment, they need to be quite big, and very often you have massive sampling programs where you get a high percentage of zero, so you get very skewed distributions. And it's very difficult to understand those. We've spent many years looking at the West Coast diamonds where that is exactly what the case is. We started out historically with sort of distributions of 80-90% barren samples, and you need to understand that. So often it's just because the sample size is too small. So over the years, what's happened is I think we've done a lot of work in De Beers and in Zstar in terms of trying to understand sample size. But then together with sample size is also the density of sampling. So sample optimization has become a key area for a lot of our work, and it's extended way beyond diamonds into base metals, gold, because the problems are the same. The business we're in is trying to understand variability. That's what it's all about. And you can clearly picture the more samples you have, the more you're going to get a handle on that variability, a better understanding of the variability. So a lot of the work we do at the moment is using geostatistical simulation techniques to optimize drilling and sampling programs.
And with that amount of maths involved, there must be a lot of scope for AI in the future and automation.
Yeah, I think there is, yes. We've used a little bit of AI in some of the software that we've been developing, as I said earlier, and it's been a learning curve for us too. But there is definitely, I think AI there's going to be a whole new world of AI that's going to impact all of us in the next few years. There's no question. Whether we'll actually change the way we do things from an estimation point of view is questionable. I don't think AI will creep that far in, but it definitely will have an impact, yeah.
And some of the highlights at Zstar over the last 10 years?
Well, we've got to 10 years, so that's also... Well, it's been an interesting ride. I think the big thing is we've been successful, and we've achieved what we set out to achieve. We've got a company where the people enjoy what they do. We have a lot of fun. We've had new exposures to some interesting deposits around the world. As you say, some of these areas are quite rural. And it's been exciting. Nothing specific sticks out really. We've not changed that much over the years. We've stuck more or less to the core business, which is mineral resource estimation. As I was saying earlier, the sample optimization is a large component of what we do now as well. But I think it's been interesting for us to move out of diamonds and into all these other commodities. We're very strict in the way we sign as competent persons. So, for example, we currently would sign off as competent persons on any diamond deposit in the world. But we would sign as CPs in gold, base metals, and iron ore, and things like that. So it's been interesting getting into things like iron ore. I was talking earlier about variability, and iron ore, similar to coal, tends to have a lower variability than, for argument's sake, diamonds. And one would assume that the estimation is a lot easier, but it isn't the case. It has its own complexities and things like that. So it's been exciting to find out a little bit more about these other commodities that we've been estimating.
Absolutely. In terms of how much minerals are left in South Africa, is there still a large untapped deposits of various commodities?
Yes, I think there's still a lot of potential. As I was saying earlier, it's a bit sad for me that the exploration has slowed down. I think the obvious deposits have been found, and some of the low-grade deposits might still come into play in the future. If one looks at diamonds, I think there are many deposits that have been sort of sidelined in the past, and those will probably come back now that the market's continuing to be strong, and there are definitely new ways and means of exploiting low-grade deposits. So I do think there's a lot of potential in South Africa. Yeah.
And the deepwater diamond mine that you were involved in, that was sort of cutting-edge stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, there are a couple of us that have been involved and continue to be involved in the Atlantic 1 mineral resource. I was one of the first production geologists in the early 90s. The first mining vessel was being developed around that time, and we had some interesting challenges from an estimation point of view as well, because as you can understand, it's a slightly different deposit. It's not... you can't walk over it and have a look at it and feel it and touch it. And although we did dive down and have a look at it with the Jaeger, but it's an unusual deposit. It's unique, and it has a whole set of challenges related mainly to things like sampling and estimation. And the reason is that you mine highly selectively, so much so that you really choose a block here to mine, and then you won't choose the one next door, and you'll choose the next one. And so you really need to get the estimation as accurate as possible, and that is based on the sampling. And De Beers have spent inordinate amounts of money trying to get the sampling technology right. They've recently just launched a new vessel, which cost them a lot of money, and it's definitely going to be an area that we continue to help them in. It's an area where we have a lot of expertise. We've been involved in the West Coast for 30 years now, more in fact. Yeah.
And 3D modeling, that must have come a long way as well over the years.
Yes, we tend to focus on using data mine. That's the software we use, and absolutely it's developed phenomenally in the last few years. We have a specialist data mine modeler, and we offer that as a service as well. And the technology continues to grow. It's fantastic now because it's so much easier to do than it was in the past. It still is a time-consuming business, and the key thing is it's so important to keep doing things correctly and not let the software do it for you. You need to understand what the software is doing, and I think that's where the industry is not so good anymore. You find a lot of people coming to university who are electronically involved in everything, and software-wise they're familiar with a lot of bits and pieces of software, but they tend to push buttons and accept the results coming out, and that's something we're acutely aware of. You have to go back to basics and understand what you're doing with the software. We're very wary of software where you can, for instance, do estimation. You push a button, you get a result, but the result is very often not the right result, so one has to be careful as well.
It's almost like autopilot, you still need the pilot.
Exactly, yeah.
And in terms of security, with this amount of data, are there security threats from competition and hackers?
I think that's always a threat in this day and age, and we're quite careful about that, specifically because we work with we have a lot of different clients who are working in the same arena, and one has to be very careful of client confidentiality. So we do have measures in place to ensure that our data is safe and looked after, and we haven't as yet, in the last 10 years anyway, we haven't as yet had any of those kind of problems where people have tried to hack or get access, not that we're aware of anyway.
And as a leader, how do you get the best out of your staff and your clients, so to speak?
Well, it's been quite interesting because when we started Zstar, we did have in mind that we would probably expand and develop the next generation, and it hasn't really worked out as we thought it would, in that we don't have a vast staff. In fact, they're more founders, directors, shareholders than there are staff. But I think the key thing is that the people have to have an interest in that specific subject matter. In addition to that, they really need exposure and experience, and that's what we've tried to do with the people that we've employed. We've tried to get them on mines as much as possible, to get their hands dirty, because that's an essential part of the business. And that doesn't always happen, as I've said. But yeah, I mean, I think the staff are reasonably happy here. Certainly they come under pressure every now and again, and that's always a bit of an issue, but that swings and roundabouts. You know, when we have a lot of work on the plate, it's got to be done. There's always time constraints. All clients want things done tomorrow. And so there's always, you know, sometimes we burn the midnight oil, but then the following week we'll go and play golf. So, you know, that's how it works. Yeah.
And as a university graduate, did you expect to be sitting where you are now?
Not at all, no. I think it certainly in my time, most graduates, I mean, for me it's an interesting thing, because I ask the students that I teach now how many of them have bursaries from large corporates, and the answer is none, or very few. Whereas in my time, it was a fairly common thing to be given a bursary by a mining house. So inevitably you'd end up in a corporate, and that was what happened to me. I had an Anglo-American bursary and I ended up working in Anglo and De Beers. I never would have at that time thought that I would go on my own. But if I look at the younger generation now, it's completely swung around to the point that I think a lot of graduates want to make their own life, their own career for themselves. So they're very keen on working in small consultancies, and startups is the name of the game as well. In our business, you don't see that many startups, but you do see a couple of small companies. The the big problem for me is that coming out of university and starting up like that, you lack the experience. And the mining houses want experience. That's why we still have, as I've said previously, we don't do much marketing. Our marketing is very small amounts, but we have a lot of by word of mouth. And the people that are out there looking for the kind of work we do want experience. So that's one of our sort of issues with our staff. Getting them up to that level of expertise is difficult. It takes time.
Do the millennials want to run before they can walk?
Well, yeah, but we just have reins. We're pulling them in again. I mean, that's always the business we're in. You have to be very careful about what you do. You're dealing with numbers. You're dealing a lot with use of Excel spreadsheets, etc., etc. So we're very aware, acutely aware of the need to be very careful with numbers. And that's the kind of person that needs to be doing this sort of work. You can't afford to make mistakes. You can't afford to have decimal places in the wrong place.
I think it's extremely expensive.
It can be very expensive you can easily end up with a mistake in the final product that you deliver, which may not be seen in the interim, and the next thing you know, someone's invested vast amounts of money and then they find mistakes. And that does happen in the business. So we're very careful to ensure that anything we do gets reviewed amongst ourselves. So very often we will have a sort of a round table session where whoever's done the work will defend it, if you like, and the others will ask as many questions and try and poke holes in the work that's been done. I think that's a very important part of what we do as well.
And why do you think the internships and the bursaries have dried up so much?
Well, I think, it's difficult to say, to talk on behalf of some of the big mining houses, but I think in our specific neck of the woods, in resource estimation, I don't think there's that much focus, or the people don't think it's an important part of the business. I'm sad to say that, because I think it's incredibly important to understand what you're dealing with in the ground before you start venturing into spending millions and millions or hundreds of millions to develop it. It's a difficult question. I also think that the market has changed to the point that there's so many graduates now that the bigger companies have a pick of whoever. They don't have to actually go and find the undergraduate students like they did in the past, find the better guys who they could then sponsor through university and then have them working for them after that. We've got a situation now where we're producing so many graduates, in fact far too many. I don't personally see how these guys get jobs. Just in the Western Cape alone, a typical honours class at any of the universities is close to 20, sometimes more. That means automatically you're producing 60 graduates, not graduates, postgraduate people with honours degrees. And then if you take into account the universities further up north in Gauteng and places like Rhodes, we're producing well over 100 graduates every year, and I'm not sure the industry can cope with that.
And in your time, how many, was there more stringent requirements to get into honours master's programs?
Well, that too, yes. In my day, an honours class was normally made up of 3 or 4 people, and there were maybe 1 or 2 master's students each year, whereas nowadays, as I said, it's around 20. Even in the universities that are not close to mining, like down here, the ones like Wits, I don't know what their numbers are, but they have higher numbers. So there are a lot more postgraduate students. I also think that's reflecting the industry. There are not that many jobs, and a lot of the students just resort to actually carrying on studying, thinking that that's the best option if they can get more qualifications. Unfortunately, in our world, you need experience. You need to get your hands dirty, and that's one of the shortcomings of.
But in your day, was there more practical experience at university?
Well, that too, yes. For me personally, I had to sort of fund myself a little bit, so I did a lot of working in between studying, so I took a long time to get a degree. But I don't think there's enough of that at the moment. In my day, I was exposed. By the time I was a qualified geologist, I'd been exposed to mines. I'd been down mines. I'd been down the gold mines. I'd worked on the gold mines in VAX. I'd been in the field. I don't see that happening at the moment. I have honours students that we speak to that have never been underground. which is rather sad.
So it's like having a learner's license, so to speak.
Well, yes, yeah, no, exactly, yeah. You need to. I remember the days in when we started with Anglo. You were basically given a period of 5 years where they didn't really expect much return on their investment during that period. All they really hoped is that you would be mentored into becoming the right sort of person that they had envisaged or that they wanted, or out of a geologist. You don't see that these days. You've got to hit the ground running. You join a company and they want to see the value for their money straight away, and that's maybe something that some people should focus on. You need to take it. The mentoring is so important. It's so important.
Finally, any exciting projects 2019 that we should look forward to with Zstar?
Well, we've got 1 or 2 projects in South Africa that are looking good. Some in Lesotho, some of the diamond mines in Lesotho we're working on are looking promising. I think there's a refocus on some of those Lesotho mines. They're always going to be difficult because they're always looking for the big stones to make it work, and so there are challenges. But I think there are some exciting projects. One of them, for instance, that I'm working on at the moment is in Preska. It's a resurrection of the old Preska mine by Orion Minerals, and it's looking good. They spent a lot of time and effort trying to resurrect things and get it going. It's looking very promising. So I think you're going to hear more about that in the future. They've also got some exciting exploration projects. They're one of the few people that are doing exploration. They're doing drilling and so on and so on. So they're in between the cracks. There are things coming out that are looking very good. Yeah.
You mentioned interesting points. So are you seeing a lot of remining of old mines as technology improves?
Well, I mean, talking about the Preska project, I think, yes, they would never have looked at it if it wasn't possible to resurrect the existing infrastructure. And they're very fortunate in that situation. They can use some of the underground development, historical underground development, without too much capital expenditure. And that makes a huge difference. If one looks at things like the copper mines, there are quite a few copper mines which I think probably will be looked at again because of the copper price changing, and suddenly these things are becoming viable again. And I think it is something that people look at in the future. I don't know about the other commodities really.
But I guess the problem is if you're on the back foot, you can't take advantage of some of the opportunities.
Well, exactly, yeah. And it gets back to this thing where you really need some big investors. If you don't have those big investors, and you're working close to the bone, you're cutting corners, that's when you're going to come unstuck. You need, when you're redeveloping new things or old things, resurrecting old things, you really need to spend the time and effort and do it properly. There's a reason why people like Anglo and these bigger companies moved out in the first place. So one has to be a bit careful of that sort of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, sir.
Pleasure.